Hey, Lord of the Rings fans, it's your boy Knewbettadobetta back with a special treat and back for episode 48 of Voices of Arda. So let's get it. Now, the special treat that referring to we can see right on the screen. We got my boy Belmont. My boy Belmont is here and he's co-hosting with me today. He's filling in for our illustrious KaliCosplay, who is a little under the weather. And Callie, we are sending you the best well wishes we can send, and we are hoping for a speedy recovery. We all love you, and we thank you, and we wish that you just feel better and come back to us very soon. But until then, you're in good hands. We got my boy Belmont holding it down.
It's nice to be here and obviously be a part of Voices of Arda. I will be filling in for Callie, and I'm sure you'll see some other faces, but we will still keep certain things in each episode that Callie has made sure to always be a staple. So we'll do our best.
We could skip those things. I was hoping we could kind of avoid those things, but I see that you and Callie have some kind of secret communication going on. I see.
Of course.
You better not come with no corny jokes, man.
Not my jokes.
Today on the podcast, we have a special guest that is actually back for the second time because we had so much fun with them the first time we got together. It just had to be done. So we have Kelly from the middle page. Everybody clap it up. Kelly, what up?
Hi everybody. Thank you very much for having me again. It was such a pleasure to talk with you guys a little bit ago, and so happy to be back.
We are super excited and happy to have you back, man. The first conversation was so fluent and just kind of went off without a hitch that we were like, we gotta have you back, man. And I'm kind of scared to have you on here because you're so your knowledge is intimidating.
I take notes. That's the secret. It's just furious note taking.
Your knowledge of literature is second to none. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, also, I just want to point out, is that the last unicorn on the back there as a tapestry on your wall?
It is not. But it's whatever you want it to be. Yeah, this is from a series of tapestries. Medieval tapestries is based off of the the five senses. So there's like 5 different tapestries. I don't know the exact date that it's obviously this is like a reproduction, although we could pretend that it's like a real tapestry from the Middle Ages.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so each tapestry invokes one of the senses. So this one is sight. You can't really see it from here, but the lady has a mirror and holding it up to the unicorns. The unicorns looking at their reflection. So really interesting tapestries. And a couple of years ago, I just was like, I want a tapestry in my house.
Nice.
Tapestries. I do want to interject here and say that I am so glad it is not a tapestry of the last unicorn, because when I tell you, I hate that movie. I hate it so much. You would think, being a fantasy person, I would love it, but the unicorns being in the sea shit at the end, I was not for it. It upset me tremendously, and I was like, I wasted my whole day watching this movie just for the unicorns to be in the sea. This is bullshit. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all.
The whole day.
Not at all the whole day.
Yeah, the book is really, really interesting. I don't know if you've read the book, but
I haven't read the book.
Weird. Like, it's a weird book. Yeah, so that's a very valid feeling, I think.
Okay. How do you feel about A Flight of Dragons?
Is that a movie?
Yeah, you've never seen it?
No,
I don't think I've ever seen that either.
No, it's no way.
A Flight of Dragons.
A Flight of Dragons. I think it's A Flight of Dragons or A Flight of Dragons. You've seen it, Belmont. You're just not thinking. You both have seen it.
Maybe I have.
Rankin and Bass with the wizards. Gorbash is the dragon, one of the dragons. It has what's the name of the wizard? It's an evil red wizard. There's a green wizard. There's a blue wizard. There's another wizard. There's a knight that goes with them. There's a wolf that goes with them. It's dope. An archer.
I bet I'd recognize the animation, but I don't think I've ever seen it in its entirety.
If you saw the animation, you'd right away be like, "Oh, I saw this," or you saw it as a kid or something. Love it. And I want to say, I want to nominate that as a better movie than the Last Unicorn.
All right, I'll watch it. I have some homework to do.
Well, anyways, being that we're on like fantasy and this podcast, I do have a joke for you. And you ready for this? We're gonna keep it on brand for, being that we have Kelly here. So why didn't King Arthur rehire the carpenter who made the round table? He cut too many corners.
Oh, that
Thank you,
was.
Callie. That's Callie. That's a Callie original, partial original. She
I
said
think
so.
Callie.
Wow.
I think Callie doesn't. I think Callie does. You can't replace the original. One day,
Nah,
one
but
day.
I'm not here to replace Callie. I'm here
You don't got
to
enough
be.
riz, as the kids say. You don't got enough riz. So today, guys, we're going to be basically continuing our conversation on literature and its connection with Tolkien, his influences, and all that stuff. Kelly has lots more to talk about, so I'm gonna let Belmont and Kelly like kick things off and start this conversation, and I'm gonna jump in and get in where I fit in. So let's get this thing started. Episode 48, two more episodes. We're at episode 50. So I got to give ourselves a pat on the back here. Shout out to Callie. She edits and puts out the content. Also, guys, want to let you guys know, if you are listening to the Voices of Arda podcast, a big thing that is happening right now, we are upgrading. We are diversifying. We are unifying. We are taking our Voices of Arda YouTube channel, where you usually would watch the visual representation of our podcast, and we are making it a hub, a place for all Lord of the Rings content creators that are within our circle and want to put their content out. And we're kind of consolidating our knowledge, our talents, our skills, our love for Tolkien, and we're putting it in one great one-stop shop for Tolkien. So what you would do is you would subscribe to the Voices of Arda YouTube channel and go to playlists, and you'll get great content creators like Belmont, like me, like Kaya K. We got Miranda, which is what is the name of her?
I think it's Ex Libris Mer. I think that's what it
Yes, yes,
is.
yes. I never can pronounce it.
She does Tolkien Tuesdays. There's fantastic. She just did her
There we
100th
go. Tolkien
episode.
Tuesday. She does Tolkien Tuesdays. Please excuse me and forgive me for any messing up of the information, but there's a lot of content creators, and we want you to get full access to them. So on our Discord, we're like a big family, and all of us get together, and thanks to the help of Bard of Arda and Callie, who came up with this wonderful idea, we're going to try to unite forces here, form like Voltron, as they say in the hood. And we want to just give you guys the best content possible. We want to up the quality as well, up the content, up the quantity as well. So you guys can go there, strengthen each other's views, strengthen each other's what I'm saying, reach as well. So we would love it if you like, share, subscribe, most importantly, and let everybody know that is the place to be. Voices of Arda YouTube. And make sure everybody also subscribes to every individual content creator as well. That would just help everybody boost and be more seen on this app. So thanks to Callie, thanks to Bard of Arda, thanks to people like Belmont, Kelly from the Middle Page, everybody who is going to participate or be involved in any way, shape, or form. So I'm so excited right now to get back into this conversation that we were having. Last time I know we were talking about Beowulf and other various forms of media that inspired Tolkien, and we were just going, shot for shot and literature for literature, and you were just bringing up quotes and letting me know things I had no idea about, and I'm really excited to get into that again. Belmont is somebody who I hold in such high esteem, who is on that level with his knowledge and his reading base. So I want to hear you guys talk, and I'm going to jump in and get in where I fit in. So let's go.
Well, one thing I do want to say is shout out to you, Willie and Callie and Tim, Bard of Arda, because you guys have just been a real huge pillars for like a portion of this community that has expanded and invited so many other people to join. And it's like one of the only reasons why I even do content creation is because of the trivia events that we did and being invited by Willie. So big thanks to that. But with the channel, you can look forward to a lot of stuff with trivia as well. We're going to be doing little like 20 question things. And so you got to check those out as well if you want to challenge your knowledge and learn a couple new things. But, one thing I really do enjoy about being here, and I appreciate being invited, is that, Kelly has just gone through The Hobbit, like page for page, taking notes, like very thorough about it. Something that I love The Hobbit, but I'm like completely inundated with the idea of the cartoon version of Rankin Bass. That's like my version, you know. I've read the books a lot. I've listened to them a bunch, but like I just took Dorothy and the Bastard. If you know who that is, he does trivia. I took his quiz on inside information. I did terrible, terrible. So, you know, I just wanted to start it off there. Kelly, you got anything you want to share about that? Maybe some interesting facts, or, you know, how do you feel about The Hobbit?
Well, first off, I also just took one of his quizzes after just reading the chapter, and I got like half right. So that's just a testament to his questions. I love literature. I love digging into books on a personal level. This is the first time I'm actually annotating a book like this. I haven't finished quite yet with The Hobbit, but it aligns with a lot of that I did in college, even before I studied Tolkien and the Middle Ages, is just literature in general and just reading very closely, taking notes, and thinking about it deeply. And that's my favorite thing to do with Tolkien. And I know that you are very familiar with it, even if you don't annotate your books. So I love The Hobbit. I, read it when I was a kid, and this 1977 animated version also holds a place in my heart. I adore that, and I do have to rewatch it. My partner has never seen it, so Sam's never seen it, so I'm gonna make him watch it one day soon.
You gotta let us know what you think, especially Sam. You know, Sam's another creator, dungeon master, who's been just kind of getting his start as well. But his content is fantastic. I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons player as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Nerd.
He knows Dungeons and Dragons like we know Tolkien. So, but yeah, I love The Hobbit. I feel like The Hobbit's also forgotten about sometimes. I don't see a lot of content on The Hobbit. I see a lot of content on the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, because I think people want those deeper cuts from Tolkien. I think they want to know more. Even if they haven't read the Silmarillion, they can get the information through like Tolkien content creators like us, but they kind of don't think about The Hobbit too much. And I love doing that.
Well, The Hobbit has so much context to it too that a lot of people don't realize. Like, you know, there's these textual ruins left there where we see things about Gondolin or mentions of Elrond, or even the elves who like would the sea elves and so forth, and the elves of the woods, which they actually do a small snippet in. I think it's the Barrel Out of Bonds chapter, where they talk about like all the three different
Yeah.
larger elven groups. But I agree, and like, you know, but the cool thing the most about The Hobbit is the inspiration behind it, because, you know, Tolkien was taking from so much from the Edda, you know, where we see the name like Gandalf, Wandelf, you know, really come forth, or like even other fairy tales. I'm not really that well versed. I know that he like read a lot of that to his kids, including Canterbury Tales and what have you. But are there other like pieces of literature that really stand out to you for that?
Yeah, there are tons, and we have to think about The Hobbit in terms of being a children's book, because that is what it is, and that is the form that Tolkien was like modeling The Hobbit after. And so you look at these stories that Tolkien would have been reading himself or reading his children, and that includes stories like Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, Through the Looking Glass, Winnie the Pooh, George MacDonald, which is a huge one that we'll talk about, and another one called The Marvelous Land of Snurgs. So there are a lot of children's books that inspired. Also, even though I've never read it, and I'm so sorry, Kenneth Graham's The Wind in the Willows, probably also a huge inspiration, although I have not done research on that.
You never read that?
I've never read it.
I've never read it either. I'm guilty too.
What? I feel like you're supposed to have read that at school.
I just didn't.
We had a very different curriculum.
Imagine, like, yeah, like The Hobbit and like the whole Shire kind of, and like that sort of soft coziness that it's got to probably inspire Tolkien a little bit.
It's kind of that way. Not. It's kind of that. There's some of that in The Wind in the Willows too.
Yeah, that's weird that you bring that up, and because there is a focus on willows too in the Lord of the Rings, so maybe that is a callback to that.
It wouldn't surprise me. Would not surprise me.
It's weird because it's not the same, but there's things in it that you're like, okay, I see the. It's hard to describe the similarities, but I would suggest reading it, and then we could talk about it. Like, me trying to explain it is going to be weird. Like, if we come together and we're like, oh, we read this, and okay, this is how we feel, it would come across better than me trying to explain it to you, because they're not the same. But there are things where you're like, I definitely feel like this helped inspire this setting, this feeling, this callback to this countryside or whatever the case may have you. As far as like other stuff, not necessarily similar, but I absolutely see inspiration there from that. But like in only certain parts, only certain places. So because they're not structurally similar and like even like story wise, like
I'm gonna check it out. I'm gonna try to check it out today. Maybe we can
yeah,
talk about it on the live show.
it's reason I said you haven't read it because it's like when you have certain books you got to read. I know that was like you got to read certain things. You got to read the Scarlet Letter. You got to read the Crucible.
I missed all of those. I know which ones you're talking about, and I did not read any of those for high school. I don't know if it's because I was in like I took some AP classes and they just assumed that we would have read it by then. But I missed all.
Oh yeah, no, but the Winds and the Willows is more probably like middle school you reading.
I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened, but at least for the American novel, like I never read like the classics that you were meant to read in high school. I missed a lot.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
But I think I'm not missing too much.
Oh no, I mean, it's not like it doesn't. It's when I name books, it's not like I'm naming that. You know what I'm saying? I was just surprised that you never read it before. But
Totally.
that's something to talk about, something to get into. That as you've named 10,000 books I haven't read, and I'm like, geez, what am I doing?
I was in grad school, and I was so surprised because it's hard to imagine somebody going into a graduate literature program without having read Shakespeare. But I did a first semester before I started attending Signum at a regular university, and we were talking about books that we had read. And someone mentioned that they had never read any Shakespeare, and yet here they were in a graduate program studying literature, which like no judgment, like that is if you're not focused in Shakespeare studies, that's okay. Like but to imagine someone had never read any Shakespeare.
Yeah, it's just so well known.
Yeah, you never.
It's just synonymous with the act.
Yeah, there's so much other literature other than Shakespeare. I'll just say that, but it's just the things that we imagined that everyone has read. It's just everyone has little gaps and they get filled throughout time, right?
If I could talk about The Hobbit for a second and how I love your thought processes, it's kind of overlooked and people just kind of focus on making content about everything else. And I understand that being somebody who I tell people all the time, they're like, what's your favorite book? I was like, well, my favorite out of the books is The Hobbit. It's like hands down. But I make most of my content on the Silmarillion. It's the reasoning is because I feel like people got a grasp on The Hobbit. And I'm trying to get you a grasp on the Silmarillion or maybe the Lord of the Rings for the part you don't know, which is The Hobbit is like, you got that, you understand that. And not that it's even overly simplified because it's actually not. There are tons of things in The Hobbit that are actually really complex. And even though it's a kid's book, you get the overarching feel, story, vibe, characters, all of that stuff, and it's fine. And then there's parts where it's like, okay, this is clearly for it's a little more mature here. You can see it in the tone, like when they're actually explaining the Battle of the Five Armies, a lot of that stuff is not just, oh, they fought it. They actually talk about how the dwarves redoubled their march and they're carrying this and the terrain and the logistics of the actual battle. That is actually not simplified, but overall you get, hey, these armies came together and so it's self-explanatory. Whereas something like the Silmarillion is like, what are you saying? Okay, where is even this place that you're talking about? Who's fighting? Why? Oh, there's so many things going on and so many things that you got to try to even remember and characters you got to remember. Oh, that's why this person's not helping. Why? Oh, this is a consequence of this, where it's more complex and intricate. And I'm like, let me explain this to them. So that's why I make more content about the Silmarillion and stuff like that. But absolutely, The Hobbit is, I think, probably the most beloved out of it, because I was most excited to see The Hobbit, even more so than Lord of the Rings. But I just happened to be disappointed on my end as far as the movies go. But neither here nor there. But it's like beloved. It's like, oh, we know that this is what it's giving, and we got it. I feel like it's understood. So it's like, we don't need to pretty much give too much information on The Hobbit. I don't know, maybe my thought process. But
no, I think that's kind of like my feeling as well. I think that it's simplistic more simple to understand, but you have to work harder to find the depth a little bit, and you have to work harder to kind of rewire your brain a little bit to find out the complexity. Because I mean, the mark of a good storyteller isn't that you see all of these complex issues and storytellings. The mark of a good storyteller is that you are wrapped up in the story. And so I think when, the fact that the Silmarillion wasn't a finished, completed thing from Tolkien, we're left with a lot of notes, we're left with a lot of questions, we're left with a lot of needing help to understand. Tolkien, wrote every word of The Hobbit that we have. So he told the story very well in that we're not left wondering, how to fill in the gaps, or instead, we dig a little deeper and we find, like, for instance, these influences. I mean, we were talking about Anglo-Saxon the last episode, and there's Anglo-Saxon roots in The Hobbit as well. The riddle game between Bilbo and Gollum is very modeled after Anglo-Saxon riddles, and the riddle about the day's eye, that is Anglo-Saxon. Daisy, that's what that, or sorry, Daisy, and then like that's modeled after Anglo-Saxon, which means the day's eye. So there's all this sort of thing. There's a whole book of Anglo-Saxon riddles that is still in publication today, I believe. It has a lot of fun little riddles from the Anglo-Saxon community and history. So even something as simple as that. And then of course, all the not all of them, but many of the Dwarvish names are from Old Norse, including Gandalf, and which is why he wasn't named Gandalf in the beginning. He was named Glendorfin, and Thorin was Gandalf because that was a Dwarvish name from history, from literature. So yeah, so you can see all of these inspirations throughout. And the cool thing about Tolkien is that you have all these deeper, like more mythological inspirations alongside contemporary children's literature. So I find it fascinating to look at it together.
I had no idea about the Manish riddles at all. So that's like, you just blew my mind a little there. Sorry, you were gonna say, Willie?
Oh no, I was saying I think it's married really well. I think The Hobbit is the most perfect, easy to understand, digestible, fun, from start of a conflict to the resolution of the conflict. Everything about it is completely and wholly, it's like, I think it's like kind of perfect. Whereas even in Lord of the Rings, there are things that are kind of like, where did Saruman go? Like, what is happening? Like he's still alive? Like, what is he's on the win? Why do we even need this extra story? Like, what is happening? Whereas like I love it, but there's things where it's like, all right, what is going on? Like this is dragging out. The Hobbit doesn't do that. And it's like complete, and it's like I said, it's digestible and fun. And that's why I love it the most. Like everybody could take a part of it. You know what I'm saying? So and the things that he borrows from other sources and he puts in there, he makes them very much their own thing. Like I know even the things with the dragon lore, much of that is taken from Norse and Anglo-Saxon myth and mythos and stuff like that. So we talked about that last time. So I'm super happy with the finished product that we got.
Just to jump back to the some of the literature, you mentioned George MacDonald, and I that name rings out to me because there is a very interesting, almost contentious relationship by the end with Tolkien and what the author put out. What was the book though? Again, I think they made a movie out of it too, right?
Did. The book is called The Princess and the Goblin. They made an animated movie in 1991, I believe. So any 90s children would have grown up watching it, including myself. So it is based off of a book. And in that book, there's Princess there's Curdy, and then there's Princess Irene. Princess Irene lives in a castle. Underneath her castle are these goblins who were once men, but have kind of secluded themselves and gone underground and are focused on machinery and war. And Tolkien was very inspired by George MacDonald, and near the beginning of his writing career, acknowledged this explicitly. There are similarities. The goblins are, like orcs, once not goblins, men. And they're cruel, they're wicked. There are some things that are not similar at all, and those are very interesting to look at as well. For instance, the goblins have very soft feet. That is their vulnerable spot. They cannot. That's where you can get them. At one point in the movie, Curdy is saying, "Stomp on their feet, stomp on their feet," and that's always kind of stuck in my head because it's like they're like battle cries, like "stomp on their feet." So they have very, very soft, vulnerable feet. Tolkien said that he never believed this. He was like, "That's not believable. I don't really think goblins have soft feet." And then the other thing is very interesting. They dislike singing, which makes sense for someone, for a group of people who have secluded themselves away from humanity. You know, songs and music are something that's a very beautiful part of humanity. And those who seclude themselves from it, it kind of makes sense that they don't love that. But it's kind of reversed in Tolkien because the goblins, like many of his races, do sing. But there's even similarities in the way that the humans in the Princess of the Goblins sing songs to kind of as they like defeat the goblins, and the way that goblins sing songs in The Hobbit. But Tolkien did say that, quote, his goblins, "Oh, I suppose a good deal to the goblin tradition, especially as it appears in George MacDonald." He also states, "George MacDonald has depicted that which will always be to me the classic goblin. By that standard, I judge all goblins, old or new." And I just love the fact that even Tolkien had a standard of goblin, right, in his brain.
Yeah.
Something you pointed out with the feet, I remember the story correctly. I believe that there's a queen of the goblins, right?
The queen has stone shoes.
Yeah, stone shoes. And I feel like there's another mention in Tolkien where he mentions stone or iron shoes, right? The dwarves. So it's another thing that I find I didn't realize there was a connection with. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
When Tolkien read George MacDonald later in life, he kind of had a different view of it. He thought George MacDonald was a little bit pedantic, a little bit too preachy, and he sort of changed his mind on how much George MacDonald inspired him, which you can't really do, but Tolkien did it anyways.
He became the daddy, and he's like, you know what? Maybe he didn't.
He's like, I never really liked him.
We have this quote. I didn't say that.
Yeah, yep. But it's interesting because so when he reread George MacDonald later in life, it was because he was asked to write a preface to one of his other works, The Golden Key. And in rereading that to write this preface, he just starts writing Smith of Wootton Major because he's Tolkien and that's what he does. So that's kind of like an interesting origin of another piece of Tolkien's work.
I didn't realize the relationship was between them was so intertwined. Actually, I thought it was more just comments made by Tolkien.
Yeah, it definitely was, and furthered by C.S. Lewis's relationship to George MacDonald as well. C.S. Lewis very openly admired George MacDonald, but Tolkien had the same issue with C.S. Lewis that he did with George, in that C.S. Lewis was very preachy,
super preachy.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to the famous quote that everybody knows from Tolkien about strongly disliking allegory. He didn't like when people inserted their views so openly and overt. And that is what C.S. Lewis did and what he found George MacDonald did as well. And I think it goes back to really viewing, I mean, when he was younger and writing for children, he admired George MacDonald probably more so for his story structure, like for the elements of his stories that involved like children's books, the goblins. And then later in life, like once he wasn't writing children's books and once his own children had grown up, he wasn't really looking at it through that lens and was able to look at it a little bit differently.
I do want to ask you a question. Out of all the Tolkien works in the Legendarium that come from inspiration, what is your favorite? Like, what is your favorite factor? Like, hey, this specific thing came from this writing. We just discussed the goblins and how they, a lot of it came from George. So I want to know what's your favorite thing and favorite factor. Like, hey, this came from this, and this is phenomenal.
I've always been a fan of the goblins. I first read The History of the Hobbit by John Ratliff probably 10 years ago now. And I was really inspired by what I learned from the history of literally writing The Hobbit and being inspired by other children's literature. So that has actually always been something that I've been interested in. I love talking about the goblins. The
Okay.
other thing that I really, really like, because we already talked about this in the last episode, but I love Anglo-Saxon poetry. And so looking at the Wanderer and how it's reworked to, where is the horse and the rider poem is something that I just adore as well. So I I love the Anglo-Saxon, like the hints of Anglo-Saxon, and I actually really do love the goblins.
One of the things I love the most, and Tolkien fans and everybody's going to jump down my throat. He doesn't like allegory and stuff like that. But there's a clear cut connection with how he starts the Silmarillion and how all biblical texts are basically put forth in the beginning, or and the way he does that, it's clearly a callback to the Bible, to the Quran, to the Torah, anything you guys want to say. In the beginning there was this, and the way he puts that forth, I think was really smart, because then it presents itself as not only a mythos that we would say, hey, this is supernatural. I know it's going to be gods and beings and the world creation, but also a history, because those things are considered that in those religions. By the people who believe those religions or follow those religions, they're like, this not only is a history, but these great things happened, and it combines the fantasy and the religion, and it's even though people don't look at it that way, miraculous things, I would say, happen. The song of the Ainur, being the world being created by song and coming to existence, whether you believe it or not, it's a miraculous, wondrous thing. Very similar to how Jehovah creates the earth in 7 days, and it's fabulous. So that is one of the things I admire, and I kind of like know he has to separate himself from those biblical callbacks and things like that. Like, he's like, I didn't use that as inspiration, even though he kind of clearly did, my guy. But he wants to separate it because he wants to say, in this realm that we're in, this is real. So if I say it was from that, you guys aren't going to take it that way. So I think that's more why he does it than anything. Personally, that's how I feel. Like, he's like, it sustains itself if I say, hey, don't think of it like that. This is not that. But I think he clearly got the inspiration from it, and I think it's like he was smart to say that, because it's like it makes it stand alone in itself, as this is its own world and creation. I want you to be caught up in the fantasy of this and not thinking about that when you're thinking about this. So that's why I think more so than anything he does that. But I love that you can use your own brain and say, hey, all right, you're telling me that, but I love how you did that.
Yeah, that was another main criticism that he had about the King Arthur legend, that it was too Christian, it was too overtly Christian, and so it couldn't really be a mythology for England. It couldn't really be, and it was also like too Celtic. It was too rooted in other things
Yeah.
that were English. But he that was a big criticism across all the works. It seems for Tolkien, he really wanted people to draw his own conclusions, even if he drew inspirations from religion and mythology
which
abundantly.
which he can do. Yeah, he can still draw the, yeah, exactly, the inspiration from it, and want it to still stand on its own and be that. Because, like I said, people are going to automatically just draw back to the thing where it's like it comes from, or the idea comes from, and he's like, I don't want you to do that. I want you to think, hey, this is its own thing, even if what I'm saying, you see similarities there. It stands on its own. So that's awesome. Belmont, any particular source you could think of?
Well, I being that we all know I love the Second Age, I really do prescribe to the Atalante. I love that it's a parallel of the story of the fall of Atlantis with the fall of Numenor, but it goes even deeper because Tolkien himself was having dreams of a water crashing over the English countryside. So it's like, yes, these parallels between this story, but also with the author's life too. And I love that because it goes even deeper, because Faramir is having the same dreams in the Two Towers as he mentions. So that's my thing.
His son Michael also had the same dream.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. Which is crazy. I mean, for a father and son to have the same dreams like that, I don't know. Maybe due to influence, maybe not.
But I know that I also think that that's a really cool inspiration to think about. And I like that he said that he kind of exercised it when he wrote it down for Numenor, that the dreams sort of stopped and he was able to like kind of cathartically rid himself of this nightmare.
I would want to rid myself of that. I don't want to be dreaming of a watery grave. That's crazy. But I love the inspiration from Atlantis, from the mythos. That is something that's never ever fully like been understood, and it's one of those things like the Bermuda Triangle. It's like, what is this, it'll forever remain an anomaly in an outlier. There's no full context to any parts of the story that we have. So he knows the overarching, hey, this civilization existed, it was advanced, and then somehow some great disaster came and wiped it off the face of the earth. There's some factual places in the world where things like that did happen. There's some evidence here and there of this, but he's drawn from the inspiration of the overarching story of that being a thing, and then placing it in the book and then making its own thing. Like Numenor is clearly a callback to Atlantis, but it's its own thing. And I like how he throws the little hints in there. Atlanta, he one of the names of Numenor, he throws it as a hint. Like it's
even the name of men, Atani, the sickly, is
yeah,
like such an interesting way to do it. And then have the Atalanti, the downfallen, and
yeah.
Andunaic, I guess it would be. Always
Chef's kiss, sir. It's those breadcrumbs, the same breadcrumbs I always was talking to Kelly about, that are the things. And that's one of the things I love about The Hobbit, where he's like, oh, this story is from Gondolin. La 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 la. Now I'm gonna go. I'm not explaining shit. Elrond doesn't explain anything. He says, yeah, these are my kin, and then he goes on, what is Gondolin? What? That shit sounds cool. What? I want to know more. And he just goes about his business. That is the best form of writing to me, because now I'm like thirsty for more. I'm salivating for more. So
one thing I enjoy about The Hobbit too is that, but also the fact that like we have not a fleshed out Middle Earth yet. So for example, in the roasted mutton chapter, before they run into the trolls, they describe the trip up into that point, and what they're doing. It's the East Road. They're going through Bree, and they're going through the Lone Lands, and they're going through all these places that like we've heard about, but they don't have names yet. So they're the way they're described. But then you go back and you read Lord of the Rings, you're like, wait, this is this area. I love that.
This is Arnor. Oh my gosh. What? This is the broken realm that
it talks about like broken down castles and ruins and such. And it's like, is it Amansul? Is he talking about Weathertop? Do they see it? I don't know.
And it's very interesting to study The Hobbit in this way, and to think about whether Tolkien really, really intended it to be part of the Legendarium at this point of writing or not. There's an argument to be made for both. And I think there's an argument. I remember when I took the Hobbit class in my graduate studies, we were talking about even Elrond himself. And is this the same Elrond that we see in the Lord of the Rings? And you could make an argument that it is or is not, just based on what else he was writing about, the early drafts of The Hobbit, how he described things a little bit differently versus how they ended up in the published Hobbit. But it's really interesting to see how he started integrating all of this wider legendarium before he really had a legendarium, in his own head. Before, of course, the Lord of the Rings wasn't something that it wasn't always a story he wanted to tell. The Lord of the Rings was a story because of the Hobbit's success. So they wanted a sequel to The Hobbit, and Tolkien had to create a story about more hobbits that, of course, grew in the telling, as he says. So it's just really interesting to think about, these crumbs are there, but how intentional are they to direct things we see in the Lord of the Rings? And I think that he sprinkled them for his own kind of pleasure and his own sort of world that he was building, but I don't even know if he knew he was building this world,
No, I don't think he had much of a realization till well in his later years. But just to point out, you mentioned of Elrond, we have the same thing with someone like Gwaihir in the Lay of Lathian, or Legolas in I think it's the Fall of Gondolin, or is it the Book of Lost Tales?
Legolas Greenleaf.
And then the whole thing about Glorfindel being the same Glorfindel that was in Gondolin as well. There was like some conjecture about whether it was the same person.
We know he reused names. We know he rewrote stories all the time. So it's very possible that these are not the very same character.
I love the fact that when he does reuse a name, like let's say when he has to go back and sew things together because now it's become part of this larger world, the wherewithal to say, okay, um, I'm going to reuse this name, but this name is going to be a callback to that person and their greatness. I know as soon as when we hear the Tower of Icthelion, we harken back to Icthelion, and even though one's a man, one's an elf, two are men and one's an elf. Um, they clearly Ecthelion expired and is an inspired name, and it's like, have you seen it? Have you seen the Tower of Ecthelion? Yeah, like it's you know how important that name is, and it rings bells when we think of Finduilas, when we think of Denethor. We can harken back to the Denethor that was the king of the Lyquindi elves that was slain on Amun-Ereb, and it was like, oh wow, like even the name Boromir, there's another Boromir before, and who's actually tough.
The House of Beor, right?
Yeah, it's so many names that are reused, but when you get the greater understanding, and he's like, okay, this is going to be like Henry or Arthur. Like we know King Arthur. Now this person that's named Arthur down the road, if they're important, that's your namesake. This is so you being important. It highlights them being important. We see it through it the most in the Dorans.
Okay.
Hey, Thorin, your name is Thorin, your name is Thrain, your name is Thror. But during the seventh is going to be that guy, You know what I'm saying? He's going to be the one. And during the sixth was the one. During the fifth, those Dorans, those names being highlighted, they that namesake is going to be remembered and highlighted within these special people. And so when we get those names again, it's awesome. I like to I laugh or smile whenever I hear a name being reused, but the reverence is there.
So I know this is kind of my fault. I took us completely off the topic of the Hobbit, and but awesome conversation. I do want to jump back because you mentioned something at the start of this where I remember your TikTok about it, where you were like snurgs, and I was like laughing about it so hard because it was one of the first videos I ever was introduced to you. Besides, like I had followed you on Instagram, but I never like connected the two.
Right.
But yeah, I want to jump back to the folks of hobbits because hobbits are one of those characters that, like, to me, you look at the Silmarillion, you look at the Lord of the Rings, you see these great characters, 7 feet tall, wielding these blades of old, and so forth. But then you have these really normal individuals who don't like to be late to breakfast or dinner, and can really be predictable. So it's always interesting to hear about some of the inspirations.
Yeah. Well, we all know that, Tolkien wrote then the hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, and then had to figure out what a hobbit was. So he says. He did not come up with the word hobbit. It's very likely that he encountered it, even if he didn't remember, in a dictionary that he himself worked on. I believe is the story. So it has roots in other things, but there is a book called the Marvelous Land of Snurgs. It was published in 1927, and Snurgs are short, good-natured people who love to eat. And the story involves two children who go into a new land, a new island of Snurgs. They get caught up in an evil witch, an evil a giant, and the Snurg, what is his name? Gorbo the Snurg, comes to the rescue. And so you have this very Hobbit-like character. And later, Tolkien actually admitted, he says this was an unconscious source book for the Hobbits.
There's a few things though. You mentioned ogres. I think there's an ogre and there's names like Golithos or something of the sort. So there's like a lot of it's a very much like a fairy tale, and I know that's something that Tolkien always talks about what a fairy tale is. It's about being pulled into the world of fairies, And that's why I love these children references that he like indirectly influenced him to create his own works, but it shows this like how do I say this best? And almost it's like this seeping in of deep reference and deep tales of mythos that existed before him, either as literature or even as he studied being a professor himself.
There's that moment, you were just talking about the chapter where in The Hobbit where Bilbo goes up to the trolls, and there's a moment where the narrator says like, "Oh, these are not the troll, like they're not many-headed trolls. They only had one head each." And that, that dates back to fairy tales where there were multi-headed trolls, which are just really interesting that he's bringing in that classic fairy tale, especially like for children, into the story.
Tolkien takes some effort to like separate these individuals, like this almost like story of the Hobbit compared to what we see in the Lord of the Rings, because he later states that Sauron created the Ologhai, like the trolls that we know that we see in like Moria or
Mhm.
in Mordor and so forth. So he made it a point, and like they only communicate the black speech of Berador. But the trolls that we meet here have like Cockney accents, they have normal names, they drink ale, they're roasting mutton. If you know anything about cooking, roasting mutton takes hours.
They have a talking purse.
They have a
Yeah,
they have a talking
magic
purse.
talking purse.
Like,
That is where we really get whimsical. That's where
Yeah.
we're like, yeah, this is definitely a children's story.
But I love that in Lord of the Rings, he kind of reworks this and is like no longer the dumb, dim-witted trolls
Yeah.
that were there 50 years ago, but now they've been twisted. And so he's able to connect them so beautifully. And it is
Yeah.
like, I think that's so whimsical and such a children's tale, and connect it into his deeper, this story that grew is just, he was a master of his craft.
And he lets you know that too. He's like, yo, the gravity and the weight happened within the shadow of the past, where he's like, yo, this ain't playing no more. We're not playing anymore, guys. Like we this is serious now. Whereas like I could have been carefree, and those things could have been fun, and we had an adventure and it wasn't as serious, but the weight and the gravity is here now, and these are serious things now, and so it shifts it, and you don't feel like it's completely an outlier. It doesn't feel like it's like a separated thing, because we're like, oh no, all right, buckle up. He told us it's about to get dark. We can't even talk about this at the nighttime. We got to talk about this in the
Yeah.
daytime. And he tells you that, and I love that. I love that. I love how he conveys that. And that fear is what makes the Lord of the Rings to me. Like I said, it's always been the thing that literally pulled me in, where I'm like, yo, what? They're so scared of these. What I want to know about these guys now, because they're so scared of the Nine. They're so scared of Sauron. They don't even like saying his name. They won't talk about it during certain parts of it. I need to know, what did he do? What is this ring? What is? Oh my goodness! Wow. Bilbo found that. I was there with the jokey. Everything was cool. He didn't know what he found, so why would he take it so serious? But Gandalf, if you listen, Gandalf, kind of like, hey, yeah, all right, let me keep an eye on you. Yeah, I see you got the ring. All right, keeping a little eye on him. So he ties it together well. He didn't know what he was doing when he wrote The Hobbit, but then he was like, okay, I see how I can play this, how I can play my hand, how I can meld these things together. And that's the mark of a true genius to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting too when you think about other children's books of the time. We don't really have an example of other children's books turning into this great fantasy series, right? Imagine if Alice in Wonderland, this, Lewis Carroll was able to write, 30 years later, a novel. And it's really interesting to see that we now have adaptations and adult retellings of Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland. Maybe not of Wind in the Willows, but we have these kind of darker retellings where they flesh out, and it's just a testament to, like, I think what Tolkien himself did with his own children's literature. But it's really interesting because we just in this time of writers, 19th century, early 20th century writers, it's nothing like it really happened. I don't think.
Yeah, not to my recollection.
I know we brought up Arthurian before this too, and one thing that always stands out to me, and I have a copy of it, is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, because Tolkien made his own version as well. And I just bring that up because he translated it. That's
Yeah,
right.
translated. I'm about to say he translated.
But I never really had a chance to pick it up. I know this tale, of course. They had the new movie, The Green Knight, which I really loved. I love the new movie.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of like themes I think that are linked between the two pieces. Do you have any like thoughts on that? Because I have no idea.
I will come back for a whole episode of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, because I love that poem so much. So the general story, if I can just wrap it down into like a minute, is it's definitely an Arthurian tale. It starts off in King Arthur's court, and during Christmas time, King Arthur wants to see a marvel. That's very typical of Arthurian stories. It's like nothing. No, we can't eat until we see a marvel or a miracle. So he declares that he wants something fun to happen. In walks this giant green knight, decked out from head to toe in green is a green horse. He walks straight up to King Arthur and says, "Hey, I want to play a Christmas game. I will, if you deliver a blow to me, I will deliver the same blow to you. And that's, isn't that such a fun game?" So Arthur's like,
Yeah, totally.
"Isn't that so cool? Like, you punch me, I punch you." So Sir Gawain steps up and says, "No, King Arthur, you're going to stay here. I will do this. I will take this into my own hands." And he's like, "This is a no-brainer. I'm going to just chop off his head. If I chop off his head, that the game ends. He can't do anything after that." So he walks up and he goes ahead and takes his head off. And the Green Knight just picks up his own head, just has it right there, and says, "All right, I will see you in a year and a day, so that I can deliver the same blow to you." So the story is it's a poem. It's a 14th century alliterative poem. Sir Gawain spends a year in King Arthur's court and decides he's going to go ahead and follow the game, and goes through the wilds to find this Green Knight, and ends up in a castle. And the lord and lady of the castle take him in. He has his own room, and the Lord says, "Okay, I'm going to go hunting. You just stay here. You have a nice little time here with my wife. She's going to take care of you. Anything that I earn when I go hunting, I will give you. And anything that you earn here at the castle, you give to me." And so it's 3 nights and 3 days of hunting and 3 nights where the Lord Bertilac goes and gets something. He hunts and gets food and shares it with as a meal with Sir Gawain. And Lady Bertilac goes to Sir Gawain's quarters and tempts him every single night. He ends up basically failing this test. And I don't know if I'm going to give away the very ending, because I don't know, people might read it. It's only been
Spoiler alert.
for like 600 years, but I don't know, maybe go read how it ends. But it's a beautiful tale of loyalty and chivalric attitudes in medieval times, and a really fun King Arthur story. And there are elements that deeply affected Tolkien, even just in like the whole idea of the Green Knight, nature and the Green Man and the Wild Man, and how much that affected literature of the day, of medieval times, and going on until the Victorian and into Tolkien as well. So yeah, there's a lot. And even just like chivalric attitudes as well, like the whole idea that you were tied between the love of your lord and the love of your lady, and that you couldn't really have one without, like, you couldn't have both. And so I think that there's ties of chivalric love in like the Aragorn and Arwen story. He's tied to his duty, but he's also can't really have his love. And of course, it has a good ending in Lord of the Rings, and they are able to be together. But that's rooted in this love where two people cannot be together. So there's
Yeah.
lots of things.
Yeah, and then being that it's inspired by the story where they can't be, he can adjust and say, okay, this is a chance for me to take this inspiration and to play it out differently, to where, hey, Aragorn at least gets his girl. Like, I think so that consequence is going to be the same. Like, it's still there. That wall is still there where, hey, you're not supposed to, but we're going to end up making it so you can. As long as I complete my task and do what I'm supposed to do, we can end up together. As where it's like those little adjustments, we take the bits that you like and then change the part that you don't.
It's never a one for one. It's just these things that Tolkien worked on both academically and creatively. He just loved it. And he loved Sir Gawain and the Green Knight so much that he translated it. He loved the King Arthur story so much that he decided that he was going to start writing his own version. Like, this happens all the time. He picked up these little bits, and it's never just a one for one with him. It's just inspirations, truly.
Since we're talking about just like studying lore and reading it, I'm gonna drop a Kali self-care tip, and this one's on how to study literature. So I'm gonna read you right now what Kali sent over to me. Active reading. Ask yourself questions as you go. Take notes on the themes and start connecting dots. Pay attention to quote unquote problem spots. Anything you're not understanding or having trouble connecting in your notes, documents, list, other text, or even music or art that somehow reminds you of this particular text. Consider how they are similar and how they are different. Look at other people's annotated versions. Research historical and cultural context. Understand the context in which text was written by researching historical and cultural influences, and connect contemporary issues to the time when the text was first written. And finally, discuss what you're reading with friends or other study groups. Or maybe, if you want to talk about Lord of the Rings, talk to other people who like Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Callie.
Callie always comes with those gems. I think one of the most important takeaways from this discussion is the things that Tolkien borrows from, whether they're advertently or inadvertently, or, purposeful, or he didn't even mind, he didn't even think about it, and it happens to come into his work. I think it's really cool to see he became the inspiration for everything else. Now, everything else is inspired by him, and through him, those other works are inspirations for those new things as well. So like every freaking fantasy thing now is somehow or in some ways or shape or form inspired by Lord of the Rings, and so on and so forth. The Green Knight, and it goes all the way back to Beowulf, and everything is now, it's a through line all the way back to those things. But Tolkien is the most viewed and most revered source now for all fantasy going forward, and I think it's really awesome. So you can't have one without the other, and I love the tie and the connection that they all have, whether you know it or you don't know it.
I was just going to say, it's like a really beautiful thing, right? To think about Tolkien's inspirations dating back, thousands, at least 1,000 years. And, these humans telling stories, something that compels humanity, something in humanity to tell stories and be storytellers and creative spirits. And to see that something that we love today and, newer works that were inspired by Tolkien have their roots in, humans telling stories so long ago. It's really beautiful.
I
Yes,
think
sir.
he truly captures that. Like, he captures that sense of storytelling that we all are familiar with now, but used to be word of mouth, to like inspire and to get other individuals like imaginations running. Because so many things are so unexplained when we speak of mythos. Like, we look at something like Helios and the sun, there's perfect examples like that. And we see these explanations, how like, oh, in Egypt, there's a giant scarab pushing the sun across the sky, but it's there to inspire. And there's always a lesson from these tales. And Tolkien took it upon himself where, he really does question something Willie and I talk about all the time, like men, and the idea of men in Middle Earth and what they succeed at and what they fail at. And that, I think that's why I love so much, because he takes those successes and failures in his own eyes from those other pieces of literature, and he weaves it in himself, like something like the Cuviero and the Finnish Tales, and like taking that and showing failure at hand. I love that about him so much.
Absolutely. Kelly, it has been an honor and a pleasure to have you back on. Thank you so much for that information. Some of these works, I'm going to go and I'm going to study them and read them, and we'll definitely see you again. That we always bump into each other, so I look forward to having conversations about the snurgs. Is it snurgs or
Nerds.
I'm like, yo, that's ill. Like, she said it to him before, and I was like, oh, I wanna, follow up on that. And now I'm like even more intrigued, and I'm like, yo, I want to know about the snurgs, like, you know what I'm saying? So, and I hope you read The Wind in the Willows, and we could talk about that. I do still want you to read Grendel. That's what I most hope to have a conversation with you about.
Definitely by the next time I see you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, guys, this has been a absolute honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much to Belmont for filling in for our liege lady, KaliCosplay, who is just out right now. I hope you get better soon, Cal. We love you, miss you. Thank you so much for participating in our discussion, leading the discussion, letting us know things that I think none of us would have,
I learned so much today.
learn so much from you every time we talk. You're a true scholar. We appreciate you, and it was a real fun and dynamic conversation. And I look forward to having you back on many more times, because it just goes so smoothly, and time just goes so fast. So thank you so much, guys. This has been episode 48. Kelly, I need you to let everybody know where you can be found on social media.
Yeah, so I am the middle page on Instagram and the middle dot page on TikTok. I might do more TikToks with Rings of Power season 2 coming out, but I'm mostly on Instagram, so that's just the middle page.
That is it for today's episode. Thank you so much, and peace and love.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.